Okay. Hi, everybody. Uh, we're so glad to have you here. Um, Welcome to the fourth of our wildlife speaker series in partnership with the Confluence Gallery and the Cascadia Wildlife of the Pacific Northwest exhibit. If you haven't checked out this exhibit, I strongly urge you to do so. It is spectacular. It is well, the Confluence Gallery has had some incredible exhibits over the years, but I have to say this is one of my favorites by far. There are some really beautiful pieces, and I believe it closes on September 25th. So you should get there soon if you haven't already. And another little perk is that a percentage of the proceeds of the art sold will go to Methow Valley Citizens Council. I am the director of Methow Valley Citizens Council, in case we haven't met. And I'd love to tell you just a little bit about what we do. Our mission is to protect the natural environment and rural character of the Methow Valley. We've been doing that since 1976. I haven't personally been doing that since 1976, but some days it feels like it. But this is a community-led organization that was born out of a deep love of this place and wanting to protect a lot of the qualities that make it very special to all of us. And it continues to this day. And back in 1976, we had no idea of the challenges ahead of us. And we're still at it today. I especially want to talk a little bit about MVCC's work on wildlife. Wildlife is really central to a lot of our programs, whether it be our work on public lands, working through the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative to advance forest restoration and forest resilience on a landscape level, and considering wildlife habitat in that process, or our work at the county level, ensuring that the county has a sound, strong, comprehensive plan that will guide growth and development in the future in the valley. And a key piece of that is really looking at critical areas. In fact, there's a critical areas ordinance that's a part of that process that identifies wildlife habitat that's important to protect. So wildlife is a really important part of that discussion as well. And there, of course, our work on water. Salmon is a big part of this valley and the role it plays in the entire state. The salmon habitat that we have here in the Upper Columbia is very important to the rest of the state and to many tribes and tribal members whose culture is really one with having healthy salmon in our watersheds and our rivers. And on that note, I think I'm really looking forward to tonight's speaker, because today was a momentous day. And today I was spent most of the day reviewing a print proof of the Methow Valley Climate Action Plan. And this was a 2-year process to really build this plan, a vision for our future under climate change here in the Methow. And it's just so exciting to be at this point where it's at the printer, and it's really not the end of a process. To me, having a final action plan for the Valley marks the beginning of a lot of really important work that we have ahead of ourselves. And in reflecting what changes might be coming to the Valley, or some are here and more to come, a big one is centered around water and how our water regime is going to change over time. And one thing that is sure is that we're going to be seeing more water pulses earlier, but faster runoff, and drier in the times when we need it most, when we need water most in the fall. And and we're going to have reduced snowpack. And snowpack is really important for water storage. So when I think of that, I think of how important storage is going to be in our future. And there's a very relatively simple and elegant solution to storage that is really worth exploring. And surprisingly, that's beavers. I can't overstate how important it is to consider the role that beavers can play in our landscape and help restore it and help us survive climate change. So I'm really pleased tonight to welcome Alexa Whipple. Alexa Whipple is with the Methow Beaver Project, which works in partnership with the Methow Salmon Recovery Foundation. And Alexa, I'm just so excited to have you here tonight because we've been talking for a long time about how important it is to partner and how important your work is to our work and the work of a lot of other community organizations in the Valley. So thank you for being a speaker, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say tonight.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I really appreciate that introduction, and it is an honor to have been asked and to be able to share Benevolent Beavers, the story of beavers on our landscape, which sadly, I think a lot of us have been unfamiliar with for far too long, considering how important they have been in shaping the Methow Valley watershed and our Methow River watershed, and every watershed across North America and Europe and parts of Asia. I mean, beavers are nearly ubiquitous, but not quite. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. And again, thank you, Methow Valley Citizens Council, Jasmine, Drew, Nick, and thank you to the Confluence for highlighting our incredible wildlife here in the Methow and just beyond, to grow our appreciation in that regard. So let me make sure. I'm going to switch this. Hold on a sec. I know I've got this backwards. Bear with me, everybody. Oh, and I told them I knew how to do this and it's not working properly. Hold on a sec. There we go. Just can't panic. That's all. Okay. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you are, or a spoken thumbs up if you can see my lead slide, Cascadia series, Benevolent Beavers?
Yeah, it looks great, Alexa.
All right, excellent. I will get started. So I am here to really share a lot about beavers, not just how they support other wildlife, though they do that incredibly well and have earned the nickname Keystone Species for that very role that they play. But they do a lot more than just support other wildlife. So got a lot to share with you tonight. It's going to be a fun ride. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to questions at the end. If everyone could hold them till then, there'll be lots to talk about if you want to stick around. Okay, so again, I'm Alexa Whipple, Project Director with the Methow Beaver Project. I did want to make a few acknowledgements before I dive into all wonderful beaver information. And the first one being to acknowledge that the Methow and Okanagan tribes of the 12 confederated tribes of the Colville Reservation, whose ancestral and traditional lands we occupy, those of us living in the Methow River watershed and the Okanagan watershed. We are committed to working with the Methow and Okanagan peoples for ecological as well as cultural restoration, and we are partnering with them all the time, working on stream restoration. And in the schools, we have a new program with Pascal Sherman Indian School where we're teaching general biology with teachers in outdoor settings. So we're really excited to be pushing that forward, as so many wonderful people have partnered with Pascal Sherman Indian School to join forces and move forward together. I also wanted to acknowledge, as Jasmine said, the Methow Beaver Project is actually a program of the Methow Salmon Recovery Foundation. They are our parent organization, and it is a wonderful fit. I'm grateful to be a project of the Methow Salmon Recovery Foundation. Things don't always seem like they fit well together, but beavers have a huge impact, mostly beneficial to salmon in our watersheds, and we could improve upon that, and I'll get to that later in this presentation. And I wanted to recognize and acknowledge my great team: Julie Nelson, our Education and Outreach Coordinator; Joe Wyrick, our Restoration and Relocation Coordinator, that's Beaver Relocation; and Willie Duguay, homegrown gentleman, grew up in the Methow here, and he is our new education and coexistence assistant. So really excited to have Willie on board with us as of this summer. So just to make it clear what Methow Beaver Project's mission is for everybody, our mission is to partner with beavers and communities to adapt to climate change and its predicted impacts in support of people, biodiversity, which we're here to talk a lot about tonight, the environment, but also sustainable ecosystem function. So that might be a big word to some folks, but by the end of this talk, you're going to have a really good handle on it, at least in how beavers are contributing to it. And beavers, they're our key partners at the Methow Beaver Project, and they are incredibly dedicated. I'm honored to be partnering with them every day and do my best to be a good partner to them. And that's what my role and goal is, to encourage others to really promote that the greater community be a good partner to beavers.
Hey, Alexa, this is Drew. I hate to interrupt. It seems that your slides aren't advancing, at least on the screens of the attendees.
Oh no, okay. What should we do about that?
Yeah, I know you had a backup. Maybe stop sharing and then reshare again, just to see if it works.
All right. Yeah, now it's backwards again, so hold tight.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a way to avoid this at the beginning of all things, but I am of an older generation who has not quite mastered the technology of today.
No problem. In the meantime, I'll just encourage everyone, if you do have questions throughout the webinar for Alexa, there's a little chat, or sorry, a question and answer button on the bottom, and feel free to type your questions in, and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, Alexa, I can see the partners and collaborators slide.
So let me try to advance here. You now see a funding and research slide.
I do not on my screen. Maybe Nick, you could confirm if you're seeing.
Sorry,
No, I don't as well.
Okay, I am going to just try to share my PowerPoint and see if we can cut down on the bandwidth here and close that out. I also stopped my video, and we'll see if that works.
Okay, great.
Okay, get back here. Sorry, everybody. Sit tight. How about this? Do you see my home slide?
See your home slide, yes.
Okay, let's see if the PDF will advance.
Yeah, that's advancing.
Okay.
Looks good.
Great. I just Should I just pick up where I left off, or what would you suggest?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll scroll through real slow just so everyone can ogle my slides for a moment. You'll have to bear with me because now I'm shooting from the hip with no notes, which I'm pretty good at, but we'll see what you think at the end. You guys can all give me some feedback, guys and gals. Okay, there's our awesome beaver partners. I'm so glad you actually get to see this photo because it's one of my favorite images from a trail camera we had up at Sheila Coe's property. And the Coes have been incredible folks to work with on coexistence with beavers. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been an evolution at their property, and they've been wonderful about accommodating beavers on their property. So I strongly value all of our partnerships throughout the community, and we do our best to make sure people are able to coexist. And if they can't, yeah, we'll relocate them. But the Coes have been really great about working with us on that. Anyways, so partners and collaborators, it's key to what we do. We are nothing without our community, and we partner with people in a lot of different ways. I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you have any interest in partnering with Methow Beaver Project, let me know, because we're usually up for some good fun with our friends. Our funding and research comes from all different sorts and sources. Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office, Salmon Recovery Funding Board. We get funding from them. We get funding from your Bureau of Reclamation, Washington Department of Ecology, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and then some really smaller organizations. Oh shoot, looks like I lost that slide. Methow Valley Fund has been a great supporter for coexistence, as well as USDA APHIS for the same beaver coexistence strategies and services. We partner with a lot of academic institutions to do research around beavers and ecology and beaver-based restoration. So we partner with a lot of different folks, and it is what makes us and our work so successful, and doing our best to get more beavers back on the landscape. So for those of you who don't know a lot about beavers, I don't know if there's that many of you here, maybe you are very familiar, but I wanted to help you connect with your inner beaver and walk you through what it is to be a beaver. So here we go. This is you. Oh, beaver. The beavers, there's two species, Castor canadensis and Castor fiber. If you were born and raised in the US or Canada, North America, you would be Castor canadensis most likely. If you were born and raised and now just live in the US, you're probably Castor fiber, who was raised in Europe and Asia. So most of our beaver around here are Castor canadensis. So you. You evolved from Castoroides, a mega beaver from the Pleistocene era, over 7 million years ago. Beavers haven't always cut trees down, but they've always been vegetarians, strict vegetarians. Beavers do not eat fish or any other organism except plants. I skipped into that one. You're a strict herbivore, like I said. You love herbs, forbs, and deciduous shrubs and trees, but generally the bark and cambium of those shrubs and trees. And how do you eat that? Well, the willow and the aspen. Oh, and sometimes some apples. We have a few orchardists have some challenges with beavers around their property, but beavers are known as choosy generalists. They definitely have their preferences for food. They love pond lily leaves. They roll them up like burritos, as you can see in that picture. They're absolutely adorable doing it. So that's always a positive for any species, that they're adorable. You mate for life. You're monogamous, and you can live up to 15 years with your sweet partner if you both make it that long. And when you have babies, you have 2 to 5 per year, and they are the cutest thing in fur pants for sure. Beavers take about 2 years to reach reproductive maturity, and they spend that first 2 years with their parents. You do. I keep switching back. You have a high parental investment with your kids who mature at 2 years. Second-year beavers help take care of first-year beavers and the kits that are coming in that year as well. So there's a lot of multi-generational family life going on with beavers. And I think we all can say we've been living like beavers for the last year and a half, as we've been mostly confined to our family home units. And think about beavers doing that all winter long in our winter climate. They all hang out in their lodge together most of the day and night. So imagine the tolerance they have for others. It shows in their community building skills. So if you're a beaver, your teeth are orange on the outer face. Why? Why would your teeth be orange? Well, it might have something to do with what you eat. I don't know if any of us humans have tried chewing on trees lately, but it is not an easy task to cut a tree down with your teeth. So there's a lot of iron. Beavers have evolved with iron in their teeth. And what's so fascinating about it is it's only on the outside of the teeth. The inside of their teeth, the inner face, is dentin. And the iron is so much harder on the outside that it creates a self-sharpening edge on the beaver's teeth. So they do have to chew, or their teeth can actually grow into their skulls if they're kept from chewing wood for long periods of time. But that rarely happens because beavers are very good at finding trees to cut down, as you can see in this photo. So as a beaver, you are very stimulated by running water to block it up and slow it down. Beavers have a proven innate ability to do this. They've been put in rooms, this crazy study, where they were played the sound of running water and given sticks to play with, and they built dams with no water around, but the sound of water tends to stimulate them to build, even if they haven't been taught to build by their parents. Fascinating, kind of like spiders weaving their webs with no help from or instruction from any other spider. You're really good at excavating mud and silt, and you tend to build into sides of rivers and lakes. Even if you can't dam up a whole stream, you're happy to dig in any place you can find a safe place to hide. And you build lodges. Some of you build a little more elaborate lodges than others with various amenities, as this lodge in Canada has shown with its antenna. And you use that tail of yours as a rudder or a kickstand or even an alarm, slapping tails on the water. I'm sure most of us have heard this incredible sound and been scared tremendously by it. Sounds like a shotgun a lot of the times, but yeah, tails generally are not used to build their dams. They don't pack mud with their tails. They use their sweet little hands to do that. And they'll even carry rocks around with those sweet little hands of theirs. They're amazing builders. So why aren't more of you around, you beavers? Why aren't more of us around? Well, as more humans came into the picture, fewer and fewer beavers were left on the landscape. And the main drive for that at first was the fur trade. But the fur trade quickly became a way to pay for settling of a new continent or a new colony by European settlers. And quickly the intensity, the drive to be the first or the most successful or the most power-oriented drove beavers to near extinction by the mid to late 1800s. And there's a lot of political intrigue in that story, and that's why I'm hesitating a little bit, because I don't want to go too deep. You have some great reading materials if you want to know more about the intrigue and political treachery of humans. I know you guys just need something more to be bummed out about, but we're making a comeback. As Jasmine said, we still have a lot of work to do, but we're on a much better path than we were 100 years ago insofar as recognizing the folly of our ways and moving forward. So if you are interested in political intrigue and history, read Eager It's a great book, or Once They Were Hats. And there's a few other great beaver history books out too that I don't have listed here. Or you can watch a film if you'd prefer that. The Beaver Believers, a fabulous film, which does feature the Methow Beaver Project back in 2014-15. Definitely worth a watch. So why aren't there more beavers on the landscape? Yes, near extirpation for the fur trade and political domination. There used to be anywhere from 60 to 400 million beavers across North America. That comes out to about 3 to 10 beavers per stream kilometer. We have far fewer than that in the Methow. We probably have 10% of our historic beaver population in the Methow, and it shows. You don't see a beaver on every side channel of our bigger rivers. You don't see beavers on every stream or smaller tributary that feeds into the Methow or the Chewuk River or Beaver Creek. They're becoming a little more dense, probably with the help of outreach and education from the Methow Beaver Project and now coexistence. But we have a long way to go till we have a significant population of beavers in our watershed and across North America and Europe. Europe is working on bringing their beavers back too, and Asia. And in Mongolia in particular, it's our newest sister country who's also working on beaver restoration. It's pretty fun to be working with those folks, communicating and talking shop and exchanging stories and experiences. So that's a big reason why we don't have more beavers. It's people, white people, European settlers on the North American and European landscape. And because we nearly extirpated beavers, we went from an incredibly rich beavered ecosystem, wherever there was water, to one that looks more like this. Our streams are pretty darn degraded. It started out from the loss of beavers, that water wasn't held on the landscape anymore and feeding riparian floodplains and wetlands and recharging them all throughout the year as beavers dams held water back longer. They don't hold it forever. I mean, beaver dams are permeable, but they slow water down enough and create deeper water and spread that water out across the landscape that it does engage biological communities on a much larger scale than a stream like this does that you see. And a lot of our streams look like this now. I think we're unfortunately getting used to our streams looking like this and not realizing how different they can truly look in a native beavered system. So I went backwards there for a minute, but so here's the Methow watershed. It's such a glorious place. There's so many beautiful places across the West, across North America, Europe, where beavers once were a huge part of the ecosystem. I want to bring this idea of a three-legged stool into the picture. When you look at the Methow River watershed, you think about what are the three main influences on our watershed, what shaped this watershed. The first one being geology. Yes, the earth and all of its transformations has a huge impact on our ecosystem. Hydrology, precipitation events that changed with climate over time. We've gone through ice ages that have carved the geology. We've gone through warming periods that brought so much more water onto the landscape and allowed biodiversity to flourish. But then we do have biology. Biology is that one of the three key pillars or legs of that stool, and one of the most influential biological organisms has been beavers for a very long time, up until the last 100 years. So what are the benefits of beavers as a keystone species? They store water, they store sediment, they store carbon really well on the landscape, as well as our forests, as well as our oceans. Beavers are incredibly good at storing organic matter for long periods of time when given the opportunity, and water for long periods of time, but they release it slowly, making it more available, especially in our arid and semi-arid habitats that really need to be holding on to water longer with our very seasonal precipitation events, and then that reduction in snowpack coming down the pike with us. We're going to have less and less water coming down from the mountains. So we've got to figure out better and better ways to hold it. And what's better than a natural native species practicing natural processes on the landscape? The way beavers do this is by connecting streams to their floodplains. Those floodplains hold the water longer. They spread it out, they store it in the ground. There's hyporheic flow that keeps water cool for all those cold water dependent species like salmon, but all of the food that salmon eat too are also cold water dependent species. Macroinvertebrates, a lot of the algae only grow in cold water that are good for those macroinvertebrates. There's a lot of nutrient exchange that comes from land and water interacting with each other. Those are called subsidies. Really important factors for a healthy ecosystem and ecological function, for water to be held on the landscape. That's how these ecosystems evolved. Water is life. So beavers also are improving habitat quality and complexity with their dam building, as well as their tree felling and their bank digging. They do an amazing job of holding nutrients and sediment back with their dams. It's proven that dams are a natural water filter, especially after wildfire and debris flows that push a lot of ash and organic matter downstreams. Beaver dams, especially in series when there are a number of beaver complexes in a tributary, do an incredible job filtering out the nutrients that, when they concentrate downstream without beaver dams, can cause severe algal blooms and eutrophication, which is detrimental to so many species, including our endangered salmonids, as shown here. So salmon evolved with beavers, so there's an essential part of their life history missing when beavers are missing from the landscape. And it's really the habitat complexity and the habitat quality that beavers offer to the salmon that is really missing on a large scale in our ecosystems. So this is an example of some of the complexity that beavers provide, putting wood in the streams, building those dams, but also making tunnels, as you can see in the lower picture. And they're really good at just opening up a canopy of vegetation in order to grow the food that they like best. They will often cut down forests along the stream and use that wood for building, but also to help grow their gardens. I mean, beavers are really farmers in the sense that they cut things down to allow other things to grow, or to encourage them to grow back again. And they move along down the line, harvesting some here, harvesting some there. And sometimes they do eat themselves out of house and home, and they have to move downstream or upstream. And we need to tolerate that if we want them around. And one of the things beavers do is help build complexity by digging and damming and capturing sediment that's moving downstream. So this is just an example, a real good pictorial from a research paper by Wath in 2019. The dark blue in each of these streams shows depth of water. And one of the things that's so essential, especially in our cold climates, is clean, deep water for salmonids and lots of other species. Where it freezes, like here in the Methow, if you don't have deep pools for salmon to overwinter in and the food that they eat, you will have frozen salmon and dead salmon come springtime. There aren't that many places in the anadromous zone, the areas of our watershed that support salmon, that have deep enough pools like this to support overwintering salmon, juvenile salmon. And that has been found to be one of the biggest limiting factors for salmon survival when they do make it back here and lay eggs. Those eggs hatch and they spend a few years, some of the species spend a few years in this ecosystem before they start heading to the Columbia and then down onto the Pacific. They need deep water, so they do not freeze through the winter. Beavers are really good at doing that. And they're really good at helping others inadvertently. I can't read a beaver's mind. I don't know if they really just love the company of lots of different species, but they certainly don't mind it because they seem to create the habitat that promotes the biodiversity to follow everywhere they are able to build a dam, dig a den, and they share it. They share it really well with other species. We'll get into a little more of the biodiversity in a minute, but another huge benefit of beavers is helping return resilience to our ecosystems. Again, water is life. Without water, more than 90% of our organisms in this habitat, in our ecosystem, our greater ecosystems, would not survive. They need water for all or part of their life cycle. And beavers are really good at keeping water around. And that's really key when we are facing wildfires at an unprecedented scale and rate and return interval. The more water on the landscape, the better we are going to do to slow fires down, to give wildlife a safe place to go, refugia during a fire, and acting as a nursery to re-inhabit the landscape after fire. And slow debris flows down when we have rain events on top of our burned landscape right after fire. So there's a lot beavers can do to help build resilience back into our watersheds. And again, they do provide refugia after big disturbance events, but also against climate change. Like I mentioned before, our native salmonids require cold water to thrive in, to rear in, and then move on down to the Columbia. And that is becoming more and more rare, especially when we don't have deep pools of water and that floodplain storage during high flow events to move water across the landscape and then let it filter back slowly towards our streams and rivers. And filtering through the ground cools water down so well, down to 45 degrees or less as it moves through the ground. So that's really good for salmon and what they eat, the macroinvertebrates they eat. And for the things that eat the macroinvertebrates besides salmon, like the Columbia spotted frog, pictured up, this photo was taken up the Chewuk River prior to this year's fires. And Townsend's big-eared bats, bats becoming more and more threatened throughout North America, so and across the globe. But beavers can help. Bats need water too. So a little bit diving into biodiversity. This will be a little more fun. This is a great drawing from Sarah Gilman, who does currently, I believe, reside in Mazama. She's a writer and artist extraordinaire. And we're grateful to Sarah Gilman, to all that she has done to promote beavers, as well as ecosystem health and art. So here's some of the wonderful creatures that most of you probably know and love: cougars, otters, bears, and mergansers throughout our system that are using beaver ponds when they have access to them and thriving in them and sharing them. There's a great blue heron. I love this triptych, so bear with me. This is a beaver lodge where this camera is stationed, is right next to a beaver lodge. And here comes a heron. He's looking for some food and goes for it, spots a fish and comes up with it and gulps it down. I mean, these are some of the incredible daily occurrences at this particular beaver pond in the Methow. This is downstream of Twisp, on a side channel of the Methow River. Black bears who are dependent on water to cool off in hot summers. Black bears have an affinity for beaver ponds because it's a great place to spend a hot afternoon, as most of us are seeking in the summer, is cooling off with a dip in the river or in a pond. Some of the great essential critters on our landscape that will utilize a beaver pond if they can find one and access it: mule deer, white-tailed deer, otters. Again, otters will even share the lodge with beavers. Beavers are so tolerant. And one of otter's favorite foods, crayfish. This is a signal crayfish. That's our native crayfish, and otters absolutely can't get enough of them, and crayfish love beaver ponds. So we've got weasels, we've got skunks, coyotes, raccoons, of course, all using this beaver pond. You also have turkeys and ducks. This particular beavered side channel has become quite popular for waterfowl hunting since the beavers moved in 2018. And here's a really cool triptych I wanted to share. This is from the same pond. That's a beaver in the foreground, or actually mid ground. And I want you to check out the time stamp on this photo, 3:42 a.m. on August 1st last year. Well, here comes a cougar at 3:59 a.m. on August 1st. And 20 minutes after that, kersploosh. Well, you might be thinking what I was thinking when I saw these photos. I was thinking, oh my gosh, we lost our beavers to this cougar. Because cougars do love beavers. Most predators do love beavers. Beavers are an incredibly wonderful snack. And on land, they're pretty darn easy to catch. They're pretty awkward, they're slow. But in water, they're more like ballerinas. And that's the beauty of a beaver pond, deep water. To evade predators, beavers can hold their breath for 15 minutes at least. And they help take care of each other, and they make lots of bank dens to hide and escape predators when they need to. They make lodges out in the middle of water bodies for the same reason. It's one of the biggest reasons beavers make a dam, is to evade predators more easily, and then to also grow the food they like even better. So when we realized beavers are so good at storing water and restoring degraded streams, the Methow Beaver Project formed in the early 2000s to start relocating conflict beavers. In our state, the only way to get rid of a nuisance beaver on your properties, a beaver that was cutting your trees down or flooding your driveway or flooding your orchard or eating your trees from your orchard, was to kill it and to either hire a trapper or use your gun. But the Methow Beaver Project formed out of the U.S. Forest Service, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Methow Conservancy. And that group of folks, really dedicated folks, put together partnerships with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Winthrop National Fish Hatchery, to house beavers between trapping them at conflict sites, pairing them, getting their families all back together, and then releasing them into public land streams that could better support them, or at least more safely support them than on private lands. So since the early 2000s, the Methow Beaver Project has released and relocated more than 400 beavers on 60 different sites across the Methow and Okanagan River watershed, mostly in the Methow. We've developed some incredible strategies for doing this and shared them across the West and North America and Europe, including the sexing of beavers to match and release beavers as a reproductive pair if we catch single beavers. And we try to catch families of beavers, but they're not always in a family way. And it's really hard to tell male and female beavers apart. They do not have external genitalia. So the only way to do that is either through a blood sample, which is how it was done when the Methow Beaver Project first got started. That's very costly and it takes a little bit of time. But partnering with Central Washington University researchers, we discovered that you can actually sex beavers from their anal gland secretions and the smell of them. So females tend to smell like ripe cheese and males tend to smell like motor oil. So that was really a groundbreaking discovery that allowed beavers to be paired more easily and then released on the landscape as reproductive families. And created these incredible ponds across Methow. It's been a very successful program. Overall, we've helped people understand the benefits of beavers better by teaching K through college curriculum. We host workshops. We've written manuals about relocating beavers and beaver restoration. We've helped make films, helped author papers and journal articles, and reached out to share this with as many different groups and those interested as possible. It's a huge part of our mission. Again, published lots of research, supported a lot of grad students, including me, at the Methow Beaver Project. And we love to have community awareness parties. Unfortunately, that got cut off, as you all know, a year and a half ago, but we're still doing some outdoor events. Like this was just 2 weeks ago with Whitman College's semester in the West, the Westies. They came out and helped fence trees out at a side channel along the Methow River in order to protect some of the shade producing trees and also leave plenty for beavers to eat. But it's just another way that we're trying to coexist with beavers on the landscape, give them some and keep a little for the fish, the shade, and for other songbirds and raptors and owls, all sorts of species that will also use those trees too. There's challenges to relocation. We, of course, nearly extirpated beavers, but they've started to come back on their own. But then we also have degraded our streams tremendously through road building and mining and timber harvest and livestock grazing. And now, you know, the latest is intense, severe, large-scale wildfires. The picture on the lower right is a stream after a debris flow that followed a precipitation event that followed wildfire in 2014. This is up the Benson Creek drainage. Many of you might be familiar with how severely Benson Creek was impacted by debris flows after wildfire and dam failures, not beaver dams, man-made dam failures after the wildfires and precipitation events. This is a few other streams look like in the Methow River watershed. This is Beaver Creek on the left, Fraser Creek, a tributary of Beaver Creek on the lower right. These both have been severely incised or channelized after wildfire and debris flows, which come down and lower the bed level of a stream by scouring it with a lot of the wood and organic matter that comes down off a burned landscape and flows into the lowest point, which is our streams and rivers, and channelizes them so severely that high flows no longer get out of the stream bed and connect with the floodplain. So that's one of the challenges of relocating beavers on the landscape. There's not great habitat to put them in on our public landscapes. There's also a lot of predators on our landscape. There's high predation risk for beavers when we put them out on a landscape that doesn't have deep water for them to evade predators in. This is one of the sites we released beavers in where there wasn't deep water. This was quite a few years ago, 2016. And beavers didn't survive there. We found skeletons afterwards where they had been predated. And that was a bummer, but we learned a lot that we just can't put them out on the landscape without giving them a good head start. So you've seen that photo already. And then one of our other big challenges, it is still legal to hunt, trap beavers in our state and most states across the US as well as Canada, and not in Europe, but everywhere in North America, it is still legal to trap beavers. And not only is it legal to trap them as a fur bearer, they are managed as a fur bearer, and their trapping season is 5 months of the year, and it is unlimited take. You can take as many beavers as you can trap for a $40 trapping permit. And there are no limits for how many beavers you can take as a private landowner, and there's no reporting involved in that. Even locally, there's a fur buyer in Pateros, does active business. That photo up on the top left with all the furs is not local, that's from the East Coast, but there's still quite a large draw for harvesting beavers for mostly recreation and family tradition. Not necessarily a bad thing at all if this is part of your family tradition or cultural tradition, but we need to be responsible about it and do it in a way that's sustainable. And at least in the Methow and the Okanagan River watersheds and a lot of our eastern arid watersheds, we're not back to levels of beaver population, at least in our upper landscape, that we could be, and conserving more water. So that's something we really need to address is Washington beaver policy and management, to have zones of protected beavers in restoration areas. That's an area not to eliminate trapping, but to protect beavers where they're actively being managed as an ecological partner. to build resilience back into our watersheds, to restore streams for endangered species. We need to offer them some protections if we want to partner with them and have them be successful. So I'd love to see the change in management of beavers as a fur bearer than to one as a keystone species, because that's really what they are in the landscape, and there's so much potential for them beyond being a fur hat or castor gland flavoring in your artificially flavored vanilla ice cream. More about that another time. But we also have trouble translocating beavers and having them stick where we translocate them. Beavers are primarily in the Methow River, the Chewuk River, Beaver Creek, the Twisp River, the bigger watersheds or bigger rivers, because they can make a living there pretty easily. Just from moving up and down streams, building a bank den. They don't have to do a lot of work of building a dam necessarily, especially integrated channels, which makes it really hard as their dams get blown out at high flow because they can't slow water down well enough in a deeply incised stream. So when we've been relocating beavers up into the high country, we're actually moving them really far from their population source. And what we have found over the years is that beavers really need each other. Even when we release them as pairs, there's a high likelihood of predation, or even under the stress of being relocated, they may just leave the area because of the stress they've experienced, may not be too connected to the beavers that they were relocated with. So when we move beavers 8 miles from where they chose to be in the Methow, the Chewuk, or the Twisp River, and we move them 8 miles up into the high country alone with no beavers in between, or even as a family with no beavers in between, we typically don't get a new pond complex lasting very long, maybe 5 years at the most if they were successful and stayed in the first place. Maybe 6 months, they build a couple dams. That is success, but is it as successful as we could be with coexisting with beavers? Probably not. This is a site up way up high on Benson Creek, or just on the other side of the crest into the Chilloust drainage, where beavers established, and then something happened, one maybe died and they disappeared a month later, and the pond drained, and there you lost a ton of habitat just in a short period of time. And there's no other beavers that will easily find this place. We relocated beavers to this site because it had potential to support them, but it's going to be hard to get beavers back in here without physically relocating them. But there's a better way to do this. Beavers didn't evolve at the top of our watersheds. They moved up from the bottom to the top through dispersal, through moving into marginal habitat, from being forced into marginal habitat by their parents, by other beavers, by being somewhat territorial with beavers that aren't part of their family unit. So if we really want to get beavers reestablished on this landscape, we need to consider letting them be where they choose to be and work on the challenges that we face when we let them stay where they've chosen to be. Then we may actually get some really strong dispersal up into our tributaries that can tolerate and handle the disturbance that comes their way and help build a more resilient watershed. So some of the challenges that we're working with people with coexisting with beavers, it looks a lot like this. Trees felling, clogging culverts, flooding roadways and yards, and even potentially challenging salmon passage in the anadromous zone in really simplified systems where there's housing in the floodplain and there's one single channel coming through what is now a human-dominated environment. Beaver dams can become a bit of a challenge for salmon in such a simplified system. So I'm going to share a little bit more with you about how we reconnect with our inner beaver in order to coexist with beavers on our landscape. We are prioritizing coexistence with beavers at this point with Methow Beaver Project. We are increasing our landowner support. We are providing coexistence services and strategies. But when that doesn't work, or it's not feasible or practical, we still will relocate conflict beavers from a site. So we're protecting culverts, we're protecting trees, we're now even protecting areas from inundation or unwanted flooding with what's called flow devices. We have several successful in the valley already just over the last year and a half, and we're doing more and more, and we're getting funding to support it through the Methow Valley Fund, the Okanagan Conservation District, Salmon Recovery Funding Board, Defenders of Wildlife, USDA APHIS, and the Voluntary Stewardship Program, which is part of our conservation districts or Washington Conservation Commission. So we're making some huge headway in helping landowners and land managers coexist with the challenges of beavers on their property. We're helping share that burden of coexistence that does benefit our entire community to keep beavers where they've chosen, because they're much more successful when they get to do that. Here's an example. This spring, we put in a culvert protector and flow device up at Bear Creek Golf Course. Ash Court was wonderful about experimenting with this. And he's one of the first 10 in the valley to do a coexistence device like this. And so far it's working fantastic. And we are committed to this continuing to work and adaptively manage it as needed. And if he ever becomes unhappy with the situation, we will do our best to trap and relocate if that is his choice. And that's the agreement we go into with every landowner that is willing to try coexistence strategies first. So here's an example of that a flow device going in this anadromous zone. This is a side channel of the Methow. And there's a trail cam photo of beavers coexisting with that pipe that's going over their dam. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how flow devices work, but if you're interested, give a call at the Methow Beaver Project, and I would love to talk to you about it and even give you a tour of a site if you're really interested. But here are coho salmon coexisting with our flow device just fine. This was an incredible sight to see when we did. Coho are not considered endangered, though they probably should be, in my opinion. But here they were able to make it into this beaver pond through a dam that they likely would not have been able to get through had we not put in our flow device, which also accommodates fish passage. And here you have one of the most amazing photos I've ever seen from the same site. 2 coho salmon swimming underneath and behind a beaver right in front of our coexistence device cages. So I know maybe some of you have a lot of questions and are pondering how this all works, but give me a call and I will happily tell you. Oopsie, accidentally left a picture in there, sorry. This is an example of some of the research we're doing at the same time to monitor and evaluate how beavers and salmon are coexisting in our modern landscape and watershed. Mostly very simplified systems that are lacking structure and complexity. But folks like the Methow Salmon Recovery Foundation and the Colville tribes and the Yakima tribes and the Salmon Recovery Funding Board and Cascade Fisheries and many folks are really working hard to rebuild good salmon habitat. And sometimes the best situation is when habitat restoration has occurred and then beavers are allowed to move in and help make it better. So that's what we work on a lot, and fish passage is a huge issue. This bottom right photo is a photo of us working with Colville tribe staff to put in a microfish array. We track fish with pit tags that are inserted to them when they're young, and they are tracked when they pass under an array that picks up the signal from that fish tag. We do the same with beavers. We put tags in their tails to see where they go. In this situation, we're really monitoring fish passage with this micro array and our flow device, but we also monitor where beavers go, and we find that they often come right back down to the big rivers that we took them from when we relocate them within days. So we really have a strong base of evidence that beavers don't really like to be moved. When they have to, of course we will. We are not going to, we're hopefully going to avoid any lethal removal of beavers in our valley and in the Okanagan as much as we can. And we hope to help people coexist with beavers so well that they don't have any desire to move them because their challenges are ameliorated. So we're doing lots of research. We want proof. We want to keep evolving as a program. And what we're finding is that where we let beavers stay, but we accommodate passage more readily for them, we are getting a lot more juvenile salmon utilizing beaver ponds for the main reason they want to is it's slow water. There's lots of food. It's deep. They can make it through the winter in most of these places. And there's a lot of controversy around water temperature in beavers, but if beavers are allowed to make habitat more complex, they generally make a more complex water temperature environment too. Areas of warm water, areas of cold water, just more heterogeneous environment in all capacities. Temperature, structure, places to hide, diversity of food for them, and for other species. In that picture are endangered spring chinook, coho, and then we have some steelhead in the top picture. It's hard to tell, but there they are. So again, this is what we're used to a lot of our streams looking like. Maybe some of them aren't this bad, but they still aren't beavered, and that is what streams used to be prior to European settlement. And one of the things that, I'm going to go back a second, one of the things that happens when generations go without knowing what a system might have looked like with all of its native species intact is what's called ecological amnesia. We forget, or maybe we never even knew what it could have been like and what it still could be like to some degree. We can't go backwards. We can't recreate what it looked like 200 years ago here. But what we can do is improve what it looks like now, and with a native species through the allowance of natural processes on our landscape. And beavers are really adaptable. You have beavers in the Arctic, you have beavers in the desert, you have beavers everywhere in between. They're an incredible opportunity to bring water back to our landscape and make a more resilient environment. So some of the ways that we're struggling with relocation, again, is habitat quality. We have really degraded stream habitat throughout our watershed. People may not recognize it as such, but I'm hoping to convince you that most of the streams without beaver in them are incised, are not connecting with their floodplain, and therefore not supporting riparian environments or wetland environments that support a lot of other species. So what we're looking at doing now is helping jumpstart stream restoration by putting structure back in streams like a beaver does, until beaver can find it, or then we can relocate beavers onto those sites where we have done some initial structure restoration. Structure in streams slows water down. Slowing water or pooling water starts to spread outwards slowly, generally without huge erosive capabilities. This diagram demonstrates that progression of putting structure back in streams, and slowly you raise the water table, and then slowly the water spills out onto the landscape, and then beavers can get in there and improve it and put more dams in and spread the water out even more, supporting more and more vegetation, which then supports all sorts of organisms and increases and does that by increasing the water table. I'm getting there, folks. Maybe some folks are getting tired. I am going to lose my voice by the end of this, but I love talking about beavers, so I could talk all night. So what we're doing is starting to put structure back in streams, rebuild breached beaver dams, historic dams. We are playing like beavers are. We fixed holes in this beaver dam, and it started storing water overnight. And by a couple of months later, we had 2 feet of water in some places. This is prime amphibian habitat and supports spotted frogs and other threatened species. There's another spot where we fixed up old historic beaver dams that aren't supporting beaver anymore, but could store water and then eventually support beavers again. And again, storing more than 2 feet of water after 1 month. 1 month it held 1 foot. By the time we came back 2 months after, it was holding more than 2 feet of water across a very large meadow. And we're starting to repair severely incised streams with wood loading. This is Fraser Creek on private property. That creek is starting to change a lot with all that new structure in there. And folks like are doing this across the West, putting structure in streams to start reconnecting high flows to riparian floodplains. This is over near Chesaw, Triple Creek. If you have any desire to travel up to Triple Creek and see this project that was done by the Okanagan Highlands Alliance in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and many others, including us, the Methow Beaver Project, we went and helped them build structures many times throughout the life of this project, which is continuing to evolve with beaver dam analogs. Building like beavers, putting natural posts in streams and then weaving material into them to capture sediment, capture debris, woody debris, and keep it in place. We're doing it here in the Methow, and this is in a salmon supporting side channel that we're putting structure in. That was last summer. This is another picture of just how you build it with a hydraulic or pneumatic post pounder. You start building like beavers, stacking up vegetation until it starts to hold water and sediment, and raise your water table back up until you can reconnect with the floodplain. It offers structure to organisms to thrive on and within. And this is a great example. Note the alder in the top right hand corner. That's May 2015. Structures were put in here that fall, and a couple years later the stream has come almost all the way back up to the floodplain, and then beavers find it. And that's pretty exciting when you build a structure and then beavers come and make it better. This is what this Triple Creek channel looked like from the time restoration was started before 2014. And over several years, more and more beaver dam analogs were added and beavers found these structures. And now it's 2021. This last picture was 2018, where there is high flow flooding, as I showed you in that initial photo. I'm going to go back a little bit. Yeah, this is what it has been looking like during high flows in the last couple years. So really awesome. This used to be a wetland prior to a channel incising event, and now it's moving back to wetland with the help of people and beavers working together. This is one of our projects in the Methow, where we put structure in and immediately beavers started working off of it and helped raise the water table behind these structures quite a bit, and salmon are thriving there. So the slow water habitat that beavers provide are critical habitat for rearing and overwintering juvenile salmon. And again, that's one of the critical factors that people haven't realized has been a limiting factor for salmon survival. There's certainly lots of others. All the dams in the Columbia cannot be ignored. But when salmon do make it back here and are successful, we need to give them a place to thrive until they go back to the ocean. We're utilizing wildfire thinning in order to build our structures. We're trying to combine those efforts. It's been really successful so far. This is kind of what it looks like before we trim things up after installing structures in a stream. And this is what it looks like the next season. This is on the Twist River. Right here is the side channel of the Twist River. And the following season, during high flow events, this May and June, we had reconnection of this stream to its floodplains in tremendous quantity. We had salmon, juvenile salmon, utilizing the habitat immediately. That stream was connected to, our side channel was connected to the floodplain for more than 6 weeks, which is a long time for a little side channel to be flooding and creating wetlands around it, at least in our studies of side channel and backwater habitat of the anadromous zone. Super successful project up the Twist River. And then we are looking at repairing severely impacted streams after wildfire. That's one of our biggest projects coming up with a grant from Washington Department of Ecology's Streamflow Restoration Program grant. So that's going to be in 8 subbasins, 4 in the Methow and 4 in the Okanagan River watersheds, where our crew, the Methow Beaver Project, is going in and building structures in these severely incised streams to start to try to jumpstart natural processes back in these streams where wood has been removed over time, not just for timber harvest, but just to keep water flowing easily. You know, the efficient conveyance of water is what humans have aimed for a long time. And now we're realizing how fallible that was, that we need structure in streams in order to slow water down and keep water around longer and support more life and be resilient to more disturbance. So in summary, it's a little longer summary, but we're partnering with Beavers for water storage, and it's working really well, but we have lots more room for improvement. But here's one of the fabulous spots up Cub Creek, actually. We are supporting endangered salmon and building their habitat quality as well as quantity by partnering with beavers. This is one of our coexistence sites. You can see the pipe in the top right-hand corner of a flow device, and these are par-sized steelhead waiting for a high flow event to make their way out of this beavered side channel. And we're working with Beavers for biodiversity to support as many biological organisms as we can, including human communities. Here are trumpeter swans on a beaver pond last winter. From November through February, these trumpeter swans were in pictures almost every day on our trail cams. That was amazing. That's a beaver lodge with a slide in the background, back left behind the middle trumpeter swan. It looks like a big mudslide, and that's the beaver lodge. I'm sorry if I said dam before. That's the beaver lodge. It's called a bank lodge when it's up against a bank and not out in the middle of a pond. And we're working and partnering with beavers to build resilience to disturbance like this, the wildfires that ripped through the Okanagan and down into Douglas County last year during the holiday weekend, the Labor Day weekend, Foster Creek. This is a beaver complex that provided refugia for wildlife after the fires burned nearly 400,000 acres through that area. And there's not too many of these in the area, so where they were heavily being used by wildlife that found their way to that spot as the fires came through, including rabbits, coyotes, raptors, waterfowl, which were probably there anyways, but deer were there. We saw fox. It's an amazing sight to see. I took this photo. I went there a few days after the fire went through and was shocked by the surroundings, but totally thrilled by seeing the beaver complex make it and the wildlife that were utilizing it after the fire. This is Black Canyon after the 2014 fires, where beavers had established from being relocated with the Methow Beaver Project, and their dams held and they survived the fires up through there and stuck around because they actually slowed the fire down. As you can see, the left side of the photo, the vegetation burned, and on the right side, it didn't. So this pond had a little bit of something to do with slowing that fire down, and the beavers were able to stay and continue to thrive there. This is a really grainy photo from Idaho, the Ball Creek fire, or this is Ball Creek and the Sharps fire. And this photo has gotten a lot of public attention because of the way the riparian area managed to stay green and wet, even after this fire burned about 70,000 acres. The entire shrub steppe burned around it. But lo and behold, water doesn't burn, and veg that is very well watered doesn't burn very easily either. So we can also look to beavers for building fire resilience across our landscape. This is what a beaver system in Foster Creek, or a non-beaver system, excuse me, looks like after fire. Very little resilience within that stream channel. This is an area that was scoured. This is along Fraser Creek again, after wildfire. We've got a lot of work to do, but beavers are amazing at restoring streams, even after wildfire. This is up Bear Creek area, where beavers were relocated after wildfires in 2014, Carlton Complex fires. And it took them a couple years to get settled, and now they're very successful in multiple places up the Bear Creek drainage that burned very severely, especially in certain spots, and incised very severely in certain spots. So this is this year's fires, one of the fires, Cub Creek fire plume behind one of our Bear Creek beaver complexes. The Bear Creek complex was established, I mean, it's a historic site, but it was reestablished after the 2014 Carlton complex fires. In 2015, beavers were relocated to this spot. It has taken them a few years to really establish, but they're some of the beavers that inspired me to do the work that I'm doing, because no one else had answers to severely incised streams after wildfire debris flows. I went around asking all sorts of people, like, how are we going to repair our streams after these severe channel incising events? And everyone said time. And then I saw these beavers that the Methow Beaver Project had put into a severely incised stream system and watched them transform it within a few years. So it didn't take more than that. I was convinced, and I wanted to do everything I could to help bring beavers back to the landscape, accelerate their return to the landscape. So that's why I do what I do. And that's an incredibly poignant photo to show Cub Creek's fire plume in July, one of the many, and yet still have this resilient landscape visible and viewable in the foreground, showing that landscapes can recover and do, especially quickly when you bring beavers into the scenario. So my call to action to you all after hearing all this is share what you learn, share what you know with others. Consider coexistence with beavers before you get so frustrated that you want them removed from an area, or share that with your friends to consider coexistence. Call us, we will talk you through the options. Learn more and advocate for new beaver management laws in our state and beyond if you live in another state. Find a beaver pond and just go sit by it. They're amazing. And when you do get to see them, it's such a gift, but you'll get to see a lot of other wildlife most of the time if you go just sit and be quiet and observe. Evenings and early morning is the best time to catch a beaver out and about. They are generally nocturnal, but not always. Come volunteer with us. It's been a little harder with COVID conditions, but we still do some outdoor events and work parties. So get a hold of us and sign up to be on our Beaver Naturalist crew. And help advocate for management of beavers as a keystone species and partner for ecological restoration and adapting climate change. So thanks for listening in and learning more about benevolent beavers. They're the organism I most aspire to be more like in the world. So thanks everybody. And that's good. My contact info, if anyone has questions, I'm still hanging on, let me know.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexa. That was a really thorough presentation. And I really appreciate all the photos, all the great visuals to see how beavers impact our landscape and our waterways.
Thanks,
if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A function and type them in. And I think Alexa will stick around for a little while longer. I know I have a few questions. And so I just want to make another plug for the Confluence Gallery. The Cascadia exhibit will be open, I believe, until next weekend. The 26th, I think, is the closing day. And if you hadn't have a chance to go down there yet in TWISP, I highly recommend it. You can also go to their website and tour some of the different pieces of art that they have. I think actually all the art that they're showing, you can check it out on their website as well. So, and also a plug for the Beaver Project. If you are inspired by Alexa's work, you can donate to the Beaver Project on their website. And so we encourage you all to visit that website and learn more if you're curious. So I'll kick things off with a question, if you don't mind, Alexa.
No, I'd love it. Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, I know that I saw recently some maps of some burn maps of both fires, but especially the Cub Creek fire. There's a lot of high intensity burning happening up the Chewuk River. And then I saw a subsequent map talking about the high probability of a lot of debris flow coming down the Chewuk in the next rain events, or, I don't know if that's this fall or this weekend or in the spring.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you had a chance to look at that and thought about, is there beaver habitat there? Are there beavers in that area? How, were beavers able to survive that? Have you been up there? What can we expect in the Chewuk area?
We haven't gone up too much investigating yet. We are definitely mindful of certainly the closures, the things have been opening up, but our hope is to get in there and do some drone flights and get aerial footage of how some of the beaver complexes that we know about fared that actually were directly affected by the fires. But there's strong beaver populations in the Chewuk River. That is one of our greatest strongholds. And it's further up, the higher portions towards Andrews Creek and that area, that they are so much more dense than they are elsewhere. 8 Mile has had beavers in the past. It's one of the oldest documented areas of a strong beaver population, but they're not very strong there now. There's been a lot of impact from fire, obviously, over the years, and degraded streams, but there's been mining as well as livestock impact that has a really negative impact on stream function, which makes it really hard for beavers to utilize an area. Livestock also trample beaver dams. I mean, it's one of the things that is really challenging when we are doing restoration and relocating beavers is we can't fence areas. Even where beavers have been successful, we often have them disperse from that site because cows like it when there's more water on the landscape too. And they tend to hole up there, or loaf is one of the terms. They just loaf around in the beaver complexes. So actually 8 Mile has been a place where we'd like to do a lot of work restoring streams in that reach, and unfortunately it did burn, and sadly it didn't have a lot of beavers in there to support protecting from debris flows. That said, we had incredible precipitation events after the 2014 and 2015 fires, and we had dams break, and we had highways blow out. We had a lot of challenges that year because of 2 big precipitation events. That hasn't happened on the Twist River from the 2018 fire yet. We have, we've been biding our time in that regard, and hopefully we'll make it through without a major precipitation event there. The Chewuk has a lot more sediment than some of the other drainages that we have feeding the Methow. So I have a feeling we might not get as lucky there, but we do have a lot of beavers in there, and they'll help at least on the side channels where they've established to slow sediment down and keep nutrients from running into the Methow and smothering salmon beds. And but one of the things I'm hoping for is that our burned area emergency response with the Forest Service, it's a federal program, the BEAR program, that they'll start incorporating getting structure back into streams, especially where wood is falling from being burned and falling over, that they can just get it right into streams. There's a lot of things, as you all probably know, that they can do during emergency conditions that they wouldn't normally be able to do, or it would be 2 years in the planning and a lot of NEPA and SEPA processes to move sediment around, even though a storm will do it in an hour, but we can't do it without a lot of regulation. But during a burned area emergency response, sometimes we can get some things done that will make huge improvements and accelerate function, not just protection, but also rebuilding function of streams after an emergency like that, or a disturbance like that. So actually fire can be a really good thing, and a debris flow can be a really good thing for reconnecting streams to their floodplains. We just have to be ready for it. We have to get structure in there that can look at that as an opportunity rather than further degradation of our streams. So that's where I'm trying to really push for emergency responses to fires like this, is getting structure back in the streams.
Great. Just a follow-up question. I know the Twist Restoration Project, there's a plan to put in some beaver analogs, I believe in the upper watershed. And was the Beaver Project consulted, or was there any conversation about putting beavers in the Twist watershed as part of that project? Is that something that could be feasible? Or
yeah, absolutely. There's several groups putting structure back into streams. I mean, that they on a large scale, on a small scale. Trout Unlimited has kind of moved in to some of the smaller tributaries, the low order streams, getting structures back in there. We've been consulted a little bit. We're new to it too. Everybody's really new to getting structure back in our smaller tributaries. And there is an art to it, you know, and depending on what the regulations say you can do and can't do, really determines how effective they are. So that's one of the challenges too, is that structure in streams is one thing, building it like a beaver would is a totally different thing. We have been the go-to group to relocate beavers onto places like that. But again, like I said in the talk, we're finding that is not as successful as keeping them in place if people will tolerate them. And what we want is to have increasing populations of beavers across the landscape. And we're finding that relocating them far from their chosen area is not increasing their population very well. We feel we may even be creating a sink by relocating them on such a large scale. We used to move 50, 60 beavers a summer to relocate them. We don't think we have much more than maybe 1,000 beavers in our watershed at the most. And if a lot of those end up being depredated or not surviving and dispersing from our relocation site, we want to make sure we have multiple ways to be increasing beaver density on the landscape and not just relocation of conflict beavers, because it's just not successful enough to justify it if we can help people live with the beavers. So I think we're going to be a lot more successful if we're doing both or multiple strategies, restoring streams, coexisting with beavers. When we have to relocate them, we put them somewhere where we've already done some restoration work and they can build off of that and have deep water, the most essential part, deep water to evade predation. We have a lot of predators on our landscape comparatively, which is awesome. Predators love beavers. We need to make sure beavers can at least survive a lot of the time. Maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time.
Alexa, that was just so inspiring. I mean, I was a beaver believer before, but now I think I'm a super beaver believer, like a super fan. That was so interesting. I learn so much every time I listen to you and talk to you about what you're working on. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And as you were talking, I did note there are like at least 2 or 3 places where I'm sure MVCC would love to help your efforts and partner, especially on some of the policy issues. So let's talk. Great. Yeah,
I would love that. I mean, WDFW is working with us on a local scale. We're trying to put up signs to say, you know, we're partnering with beavers in this site. Please do not disturb the beavers. But again, that's a suggestion. It's not policy. It's not law. Yeah. But we're hoping the more education we can do, and that is also an area we can connect with you, MVCC, to just help people understand the potential we have right here already. We just have to be tolerant and creative, and the world is our oyster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to thank everybody. Thank you, especially Alexa, for taking the time tonight, and everybody else for joining us. Don't forget, coming up, we have 2 more events, all these events in the midst of a pandemic. Oh my gosh. One on Monday at 6 o'clock at the Barnyard. Now that's a limited audience. So we're showing the film 2040, which is an incredible film by an Australian director who basically asked the question, what could our world look like if we instituted the climate solutions that we know of now and have at our disposal? What if we just started doing them? What could our world look like?
And it is such an inspiring film, and it's timely. And I hope as many of you can join at the Barnyard Monday, 6 o'clock. And we have our last speaker in the Wildlife Speaker Series is going to be Bill Gaines, who's a biologist, formerly with the Forest Service, has studied grizzly bears for many, many years. And he's going to give what I know is going to be a fascinating talk about grizzly bear habitat in the North Cascades and the food of grizzly bears up in the North Cascades. There's so much to learn about food sources of grizzlies. And then there's a pretty fun event on Saturday at Art Walk. Folks who've been involved in developing the Methow Valley Climate Action Plan, which launches, goes public on Wednesday. They're going to be at Art Walk, set up with tables, and there's going to be some presentations at the pavilion at Twistworks on Saturday, and I believe that runs from 1 to 4, if I got that right. And again, thank you to the Confluence Gallery. If you haven't had a chance to go into the gallery, check out their website. You can view the exhibit online. You can even purchase art online. And hot tip, any art purchased tonight will get double the percentage of the proceeds we get from this exhibit. So thank you again, Confluence Gallery, for generously sharing your exhibit with us. We are very appreciative of that. And last but not least, support the Beaver Project. And if you're not a member of MVCC, please join us. We'd love to have you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you, Alexa.